give us some parting pieces about what is we look at so many artists that even if they didn't pass away recently from drugs, they at one point Vesta, Michael, Whitney. We could just go down the list. Coltrane. We've got young artists right now. One in particular I'm thinking about, who's an illustrious alum from Berkeley, who's on dialysis, whose manager pushes him out in front of an audience, and he's a young brother who is Phyllis Hyman, who is so sick. How do you reconcile this in terms of this playing these people all the time on the radio?
One thing that I was thinking of, and I can't think of the writer's name who I'm thinking about right now. In one of his books, he makes a distinction between what he calls the Saturday night function and the Sunday morning function. And he comes up with the idea that for some of us, the Sunday morning function is able to satisfy us, able to give us that peace that we'll find satisfactory. But for others of us, we have to go to that Saturday night function to find that peace. So we don't find peace in the singing of that spiritual, but we find peace when we sing, the sun's gonna shine in my back door someday. We find it in that kind of idea. I think that's what has been a part, again, of the African American tradition since we first got here. We go back to the ring shout, or we go back to the gatherings in Congo Square. We find that those people performed, went around in a circle and sang and did their holy dance, for lack of a better term, and they did it so long until they were able to go into trances and to a state of ecstasy. And I think that's something that perhaps those folks who find themselves caught in the grips of drugs are still trying to find that state of ecstasy. They haven't been able to find a way to deal with this world. So, as I said earlier, when we were talking in the back room, there's a line from a Jimi Hendrix song, which I've always thought was a junkie's line. Although I don't know that Hendrix was a junkie, but I've always thought it was a junkie's line. Hendrix said, "Fall, mountain, just don't fall on me." So the world could go wherever it's going to go. This whole building could fall down. Fall, mountain, just don't fall on me. So they are looking for some peace, some way to deal with this situation. Perhaps as an artist, they have a different kind of sensitivity, and so they find that the way they can deal with this is by going into some sort of substance abuse. That's how they choose to deal with those problems, and that's. But then you then find the person like a Charlie Parker who will tell you, and told many an artist, this is not the way to be a great musician. He never told you, yeah, man, if you want to play like me, you better get in the back room and shoot up some. He told them no. He in fact got mad at musicians who came to him and said, well, I'm doing this, man, to be like you, so I could be a great musician. He always said, no, that's not the way to be a great musician.
And that's the same thing that Etta James told Chaka Khan. She said, everybody has passed that. Now, and I just want to just piggyback very quickly and inject something here. The new research on the brain shows that when you start to use drugs and you start to feel good as a result of using any kind of addictive substance, what happens is that, you get the dopamine thing happening in the brain, you start to feel good, and then your brain starts to will tell you that you need to continue to do this because it feels good. So you actually create a pattern in your brain and in your consciousness that will have you going back to this because you falsely believe that you can always maintain this kind of elevation. And that is it's so false, and it's so detrimental because it's just not true.
This is a good jazz riff, isn't it? We just, And I wanted, Larry, you wanted to.
No, go ahead.
I told the other panelists in that back room we keep referring to, I came here today to talk to the person that's struggling. There is somebody in here right now who is struggling with the same demons, maybe just similar that Ray Charles struggled with. And somebody's probably telling you, every once in a while, hinting a little bit. I know my younger sister threw a button at me one day back in 84, and it said, "Reality is for people who can't handle drugs." I laughed, because I thought she was praising me, because I thought I could handle drugs. I thought that my life was going just splendidly. But in reality, it was crashing, and my children were suffering. So let's flash forward. What happened? I got some help. I got to that point of surrender that somebody was talking about, that Ray Charles got to. In addiction recovery, we call that surrender. You got to find one person. I told them I wish I'd been, before this happened, before the Clint Eastwood and the empty chair thing, because what I wanted to bring to you today was just imagine that Ray Charles was with me in a 12-step meeting, anonymously. Nobody would know exactly who he was. Imagine that, and he could get butterballs spiritually naked and tell them what his fears, doubts, and insecurities are or were. Just imagine that. And that there'd be a room full of people and just one person. That's all it takes to get started. One person saying, "I believe in you and I want to help you in your recovery. I believe in you with all your warts and all your insecurities and your genius." Because without that, without those warts and insecurities, you might not be the genius that you are. We just need to learn how to manage it so it doesn't overpower you and compel you to use things you don't want to use. And that's what we came here to do.
The other piece I just wanted to add on to that, Zakiya, is also that that in abusing and using alcohol and drugs, that as artists, we sometimes believe that you start to get into this whole denial circle, and you start to believe that your art is based on your using.
Yes.
And you know, Ray Charles'
And so
son.
I can't sing
Oh,
if
baby.
I'm not high. And I used to, but you have to go back to the authentic self, you know, and know that who was that authentic person that first began to sing? Who was that authentic person that first began to dance and write and act and perform and play music? Who was that authentic person? Because that person is still there. But because you've probably been using for so long, you have tricked yourself into believing that your art is associated with your addiction. Make no mistakes about it. That there is an artist in there, there's a part of you that's authentic as an artist that you have never touched, that you will realize once you stop using. And you see that with so many artists. You saw that with Ray Charles, and you saw that with so many other artists, that once they got, it's the ego and the self-esteem. That once they learned that their self-esteem needed to be developed, once they learned to really love themselves, and once we learn to really know ourselves, that you really hit that epitome, that one time that you hit it, maybe when you were using or you weren't using, but you hit it. I remember, for me, one time I was dancing, and I was dancing alone, and I was in New York City, that's where I lived, and I was dancing, and I danced so much in this room. It was kind of very similar to this, but there was daylight, and it went from daylight, and it was getting dark, and it was dusk, and this music was playing, and there was nobody else there but me, my God, and my art. And I danced so hard that I had an orgasm. That is the epitome. That's the natural, authentic you. And so you can reach that without getting high on drugs, because it's there. And that's about those endorphins and the dopamine and all of that. It's all there. Just trust yourself.
Well, on that note, I think we want to. I want to get everything in. I love all of you so much. Let's give them a round of applause over the panelists. And what I want to do now is to take a few questions from the audience, and then we're going to have these incredible musicians here at Berkeley to finish out the program. I know Ray Charles is looking down and very happy that we've elevated him to a place that goes beyond iconic status based on money and record sales, but that his example in so many ways, even his example of how he was able to kick his drug addiction, is a litmus and is a way that some artists can use in terms of their future viability. So are there any questions? Yes, right here, Professor Da Silva.
I'm curious to hear from the doctors. Could you elaborate for me a little more on when the art becomes an addiction? And
Well, I think that-
especially for religious iconic artists who, in an African tradition, musicians are not seen as musicians, but sometimes they are also seen as religious figures in a community, in a village. So when begs the responsibility on, I'm here representing God or whatever, and I'm giving, and then you become the superstar, not just in a church community. You become the superstar internationally, or as a jazz artist or whatever.
I think that what just to begin this, I think that it's very, very important to get back to thinking about the ego and the fact that you have to have some humility as you embrace anything that you're involved in. I think it's also very, very important that, as was mentioned before by, so eloquently by a couple of the panelists, anytime you engage in any activity and it gets to the point of obsession, you have a problem. You have to learn how to step back from that and really be able to look at the entire picture and not just be so entrenched in something that it consumes you.
Dr. White? And
Yes,
then
I'll say two things. Professor Watson mentioned when your brain takes over, it becomes compulsive, and the neurons are screaming out to get more dopamine. It's going to tell you, you say, well, I'm just going to sniff it. I'm not going to use needles. Next thing you know, you're using needles.
Keep
Wait
moving
a
the
minute,
line.
no,
Keep
you
moving the
cross the
line.
line because your brain keeps telling you. That's number one. But then there are other hallmarks of addiction, and I'll talk about myself. I've never been strung out on a substance. But one of my addictions is doing good for other people. People say, that's not an addiction. Ah, yes it is. Yes it is.
Disease to please.
I'll tell you the hallmarks. Here are the hallmarks of addiction. The hallmarks of addiction is if you're doing something and your life becomes unmanageable.
That's right.
See, if I'm overextended and my life is unmanageable, that's an addiction. So I can see it in myself. There's one addiction in many behaviors. The other is if you have to watch it every day. I have to watch every day. My tendency to say, yeah, I'll do that for you.
absolutely.
See, that's an addiction, Ron White. So these are the hallmarks that make it clear when the behavior is destroying you.
That is, I raised my hand to that, and that's why yesterday I had to take inventory because I had fallen off the wagon. I looked around and I was out of recovery. And a few weeks ago, some people in this room will know what I'm talking about. I, in my goodwill, had opened myself up to a number of concert situations, and it didn't go the way it should have gone. And then there I was back saying, why did I do this? And so that's an important point. Professor Jethro, that was a wonderful. We really are pressed for time here, and I'm determined to not be the one to be over. Are there any other questions? I also have my colleague here, Professor Karen Wax from Music Therapy Department, and she has been a great support and always is. We can always depend on her to be there, trying to expand the way we teach music here at Berkeley.
I have to say, Larry,
Yes.
I can't say how much I enjoyed the music walking in this room. Oh,
It was so.
Well, we're going to get ready for it again, so let's have the panelists to thank them, and we're going to have them to take their seats. Don't anybody leave. I want the musicians to get back up to their instruments. Lloyd, can you help? Let's get the musicians back up. There's no better way to end this than with the great music of Ray Charles. Let's get them back into their places.